Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War, Warhammer 2 quick match gameplay. This time around we are on the map Oakenhammer playing as the Wood Elves against the forces of the Empire. And shout out to my opponent here, FrankoTW. War. He runs his own German-speaking YouTube channel, and I do believe Twitch, so be sure to check him out. He's also a subscriber of the channel, so it was a pleasure to run into him and get a game in with a fairly, in my opinion, fairly fun sort of matchup. Empire against Wood Elves, definitely a lot of options for both factions. Definitely a lot of things they can do. Empire with its heavy cav artillery, cheap front lines, has a lot of staying power. At the same time, Wood Elves with their heavy archer presence, their flyers, their potent mid-tier sort of chaff clearing like War Dancers and Dryads. Definitely Wood Elves have a lot of tricks up their sleeve as well. So there's just a lot of back and forth, and I think this is a very fun matchup because of that. As I guess a lot of Empire matchups are. Empire just tends to allow factions to do more things for both sides. So for my build here, I didn't want to rely on Way Watchers. It's kind of a crutch for a lot of Wood Elf players, myself included, to just bring a bunch of Way Watchers and gun your opponent down. Didn't really want to do that. So we are rolling with an Ancient Tree Man because I did still bring 2 Way Stalkers, and so I needed magic. So the Ancient Tree Man coming in with Earthblood as well as Flesh to Stone. He's also got a Power Stone to get Winds of Magic, Call of the Woods as well as Life Bloom. So hopefully we'll be able to get some good heals. And the Flesh to Stone is, in my opinion, very good to sort of beef up your Wild Riders if you're worried about fighting enemy cav. And Wild Riders will get dumpstered by, say, Reiksguard or Knights of the Blazing Sun. But you throw a Flesh to Stone on them and they suddenly become much, much tankier. Otherwise, you can buff up your War Dancers, your Dryads, even your Hawk Riders, make them just that little bit extra tanky against units like Spears or Swordsmen or Reiksguard, Knights of the Blazing Sun, that sort of stuff. And definitely, I think a nifty spell here. 2 Way Stalkers to pressure my opponent's backline. They can do an okay job against artillery pieces. Definitely very good at sniping heroes because their their shots home. So especially against heroes like, there's the Light Wizard in here. He's actually on foot. So against heroes like that, they're incredibly powerful, and they will just dumpster poor Light Wizard in a handful of shots. And so I really do love my Way Stalkers. I bring them in most, if not all, of my Wood Elf builds. At least one of them, and they can be such a potent force in the battlefield. Finally, well, it's kind of a rush build. So the rest of the army, Eternal Guards with shields making up the front line. These guys, they're fairly durable. Obviously very high melee defense, AP, which is good, and anti-large, which is good against Empire heavy cav. And with their silver shields, they can soak up shots that would otherwise pepper my War Dancers and Dryads. Besides that, we do have 2 Dryads, as you can see, and 2 War Dancers. These guys are just there to clean up the chaff. I figured most of my opponent's troops would most likely be Swordsmen, Spearmen, Flagellants, maybe some Halberdiers or something, but really didn't expect too much of a heavy infantry presence and figured the War Dancers would be good for chaff clearance. On the flanks, we do have some Wild Riders with shields. These guys are very good at mopping up backlines and passable at tying down enemy heavy cav if you really need to, if push comes to shove. And I figured in tandem with Hawk Riders, who I think are a bit of a risky pick in this matchup, I figured in tandem with them, the Wild Riders would be able to pin cav in place, then we get rear charges, we get some AP damage, and it would be wonderful. Hawk Riders themselves, kind of here to counter Outriders with grenade launchers, because was kind of worried about them, because I didn't have very good counters against them otherwise. Wild Riders are just easy to zone out with heavy cav, and Way Stalkers can't kill them quickly, so I figured, you know, Hawk Riders might be decent. Now for my opponent's build here, well, he's got pretty wide. You can see he outnumbers me. He's got about 1,000 troops. For his Lord rolling with a Boris Todbringer, he's mounted on a Griffin, pretty darn stripped down. He's got Foe Seeker as well as the Midland Runefang for that self-healing. Definitely a reasonable choice if you're trying to go as cheap as possible. Personally, I'm not a fan of Boris on the Griffin in this match. I think that it's very risky if your opponent brings Way Watchers. Now, obviously, I did not, but in my opinion, it's just safer to bring Empire Lords on a foot or on a horseback. Boris is actually, Boris I think has a silver shield on foot, but even if you put him on horseback, you get a bronze shield. He's fairly tanky, and you can bring us other buffs and debuffs, which is cool. But definitely a potent foe, and definitely a threat to the Ancient Tree Man here, which could be a problem. Now, alongside that, as we noted before, there is a Light Wizard here in the woods, hiding out with Net and Shem's Burning Gaze. I do believe Shem's Burning Gaze actually got a buff in the last patch. Does a little bit more damage now. Perhaps a good spell against the Tree Man. We'll definitely see if it gets fired off. Potentially powerful. And the nets, of course, are just absolutely brutal. They can net down my Wild Riders, my Hawk Riders, open them up to charges from Reiksguard or shooting from the Silver Bullets or units like that. Definitely some nastiness possible there. For his front line, my opponent simply brought a whole bunch of Spearmen. These guys, of course, can have shields, so they're going to be able to soak up some missile fire if needed, and they're passable. They'll like hold up Eternal Guard or Dryads for a long time. A bunch of Flagellants. These guys will dumpster Eternal Guard. They'll trade really well into most Wood Elf infantry. a single unit of greatswords to anchor the line. These guys are very powerful and will basically be able to take on anything I throw at them. And then 3 mortars to really punish my infantry and probably to counteract my skirmish play. Mortars are not the most accurate without chevrons, so we'll definitely see how precise or how much damage they can get out. You can see over there they've kind of whiffed all their shots in the eternal guard, so definitely not the most precise artillery piece in the game, but with 3 of them they should definitely be able to get some value in. Finally, silver bullets here in the back alongside 2 Reiksguard. Reiksguard, of course, great for backline defense against wood elves. They can just dumpster wild riders, and silver bullets, good zoning tool, good against flyers. They can punish a tree man and definitely do some work. So as we close the distance here, the War Dancers are coming under some withering fire. You can see they've already lost about 1,000 HP, which is pretty insane. And that just shows how squishy they are. Sure, they've got physical resist. Sure, they've got... Well, that's about it. They've got physical resist. They don't have much else. Their melee defense is fairly high, but that's useless against the mortars. So they're just getting shredded here. Poor ladies just don't stand a chance, and they're already losing huge amounts of HP. Now over here we do fire an arrow of Kurnus, take out a mortar, which is nice. We get a gun offline. That basically cuts down on his ammo by 30%, but still, just not that much. The greatswords here do get clipped by another arrow of Kurnus, losing about 10 models. War Dancers dive in against the flatulence. What I should have done here is pop the defensive ability on the War Dancers, but I did not, so they're not going to get that much value as they could. And under that withering mortar fire, they are actually going to rout. Now over here on this flank, Wild Riders as well as Hawk Riders are trying to shut down the artillery pieces. Unfortunately, my opponent here doesn't net my Hawk Riders down, dives in with boars, and starts peppering me down, which is really some brutal stuff. These Wild Riders over here committing to the fight, trying to get it on the silver bullets. I was just desperately trying to get silver bullets offline because I figured they were one of the most important targets on my opponent's list. Over here, the Dryads are kind of diving through, chewing up these flagellants a little bit alongside the Eternal Guard. While here in the main pit fight, it's going to be a bit of a wet noodle contest between the Spears and the Eternal Guard. War Dancers are kind of swarming through. But it's definitely some rough stuff. You can see already a lot of Hawk Riders are down. These guys over here pretty beat up. I'm trying to interrupt my opponent's mortar fire. It's just not quite working. We were able to remove these silver bullets from play. Over here they're going to rout, I do believe. You can see I am dropping an Earthblood there, trying to heal these guys up, but it's just nowhere near enough. And kind of a wasted Earthblood, because all I did was heal 1 unit of Hawk Riders who then promptly get wrecked. So definitely a misplay on my part. A lot of the magic wasted there. And in the meantime, the Tree Man just standing around doing nothing. The Waystalkers, though, are going to start advancing and looking to pick at this Light Wizard, because that is, of course, a critical target, a unit that needs to get off the field, and I need to remove him from play as soon as I can. In the meantime, the Wild Riders are running for dear life, just trying to evade the pressure from the Reiksguard. Same thing over here. They're actually able to mop up some Spearmen. The Spearmen not having the best leadership is going to be a boon for us. We're going to be able to mop them up. And in the meantime, the Waystalkers are starting that punishing barrage. And you can see just how quickly that Light Wizard goes down. He started off at 2,500 to 2,600 almost HP, and he is dropping by a good 700 or so HP. He tries to counteract me with Shem's Burning Gaze, but that does basically nothing. And he is getting peppered down just in brutal fashion. Now over here, in the meantime, good old Boris is going to dive in against the Tree Man, but the Tree Man does have 48 melee defense, so he's not going to take too much nonsense here. And in the meantime, the Wild Riders are getting into the cookie jar, diving into the silver bullets and shutting them down once more. And this time around, it's probably going to be game over for the silver bullets. They don't really stand a chance. Wild Riders are very well kitted out to crush this sort of infantry. My opponent actually pulls it, realizing they're kind of goners. He pulls his Reiksguard over this way. And that moment of hesitation, perhaps, of indecisiveness, trying to decide if he should try to save the silver bullets or not, perhaps cost him a bit here. But regardless, my War Dancer is basically offline. If you take it over, I can look at the battlefield. You can see balance of power still dead center. And things are not really going ideally either way. I've lost both my Hawk Riders. They both routed. I've lost most of the unit of Wild Riders. And another one's about down to half HP. But that said, Franco has lost a good chunk of his mortars. He's lost an entire mortar. He's lost all of the silver bullets. They completely shattered. His Light Wizard's basically a goner. And Boris wasn't really able to alpha strike my Ancient Tree Man here. And slowly but surely, these flags are getting cleaned up. And the Eternal Guard, alongside the Dryads, doing some work. The Waystalkers, in the meantime, chipping down that Light Wizard. He's now down to 400 HP and in full rout. And now the Waywatchers are starting to, or the Waystalkers, sorry, are starting to chip away at Boris. And this is actually going to be rough. Now, Boris certainly does have 85 armor. He certainly does have some survivability. Don't get me wrong. He's obviously got that regen. But Waystalkers are going to be doing some serious damage. You can see they're hitting it for about 150 a pop, and that's going to add up. It might not seem like a lot, but it does add up. Those numbers will start going higher and higher. You're going to see Boris here just dropping in HP. Now over here, the Flagellants are trying to chase my Waystalkers, which is a very good move, but the Eternal Guard and Tree Men are going to intercept and stop them. In the meantime, these Spearmen over here are going to rout. finally buckling under pressure. While over here, the Wild Riders are still running away from the Reiksguard, just trying to avoid them and not get murderized. There's also quite a lot of units on both sides sort of fleeing out to the peripheries. Over here, the War Dancers actually plowed through, got 143 kills before getting eradicated, just kind of crushed everything in their path for a bit. And that does show how powerful War Dancers can be if they aren't dealt with by mortars or cavalry. And as you can see here now, things are definitely getting a little grim over here. The Waystalker actually pushed close enough to get a shot into the Light Wizard, forcing him off, breaking his leadership, and forcing him to flee. And things are definitely still very much in the balance. Now, balance of power slightly in my opponent's favor now. Not very much, though. Over here, the Reiksguard's trying to sort of evade getting pincered by the Eternal Guard because that's not where they want to be in life, while the Wild Riders do mop up these spears. Here in the pits in the meantime, the Great Swords sort of fighting fairly well here against the Dryads. Obviously, Dryads not really meant to counter them. But at the same time, the Treemen and Eternal Guard clearing up these flagellants, getting rid of them. And Boris is going to actually commit here, trying to get in on my Waystalkers. So, not necessarily a bad move. The Waystalkers have been an absolute nuisance this game. They obviously took the Light Wizard offline completely. But I do drop an Air of Kurnus on him. And now the Wild Riders, the ones that have been barely alive throughout this game, actually get a nice surround here on Boris. And Boris is suddenly in a dire spot. He's not able to escape. He's struggling to squeak out. Wild Riders have decent mass. And I see my opponent coming in with the Reiksguard. So we're actually going to counteract him here with a Flesh to Stone. And so that's going to make these guys much tankier. It's going to let them keep Boris pinned down. Boris is getting peppered by the Waystalkers this whole time. And now the Treeman is coming in. So Boris is just having a horrible time of it. He's getting absolutely pulverized down to about 1100 or so HP. He actually charges into the Waystalker rather than taking off the ground. Takes another shot there from a bow or perhaps even the melee attack on the Waystalker. And he is not in a good spot. He's not in a happy place here. And he's actually going to flee. So Boris is routed off. He's actually hit his healing cap almost. And he's fleeing for dear life here, just trying to squeak away. And the Treeman is going to anchor things here. He's going to be able to lock things down, beat up this Reiksguard when they try to deal with my Waystalkers. And Waystalkers being infantry are just going to get knocked all over the place, bowling balled, and that's going to protect them for sure. That said, as far as the actual armies go, I basically don't have an army anymore. My Eternal Guard is completely buckling on this flank. The Great Swords have been doing absolute work, just destroying them. The Mortars as well, just pulverizing my troops. There's still 2 Mortars online. Some of them rallied and came back, so now they're barraging me even more. And the only units I really have intact are my Dryads, and at this point my infantry being completely removed from play, and things are looking dire. You can see balance of power shifting out of my favor. Now the Treeman is going to commit here, try to shut down the Reiksguard, and you can see the Waystalkers desperately trying to chip down Boris, because I figured if I can get Boris dead, if I can rout him off, shatter him, whatever, doesn't really matter what it is. But if I can remove Boris from play, I can maybe turn the tide here. I can maybe force terror outs. And you can see there, Arrow of Kurnus smashing into his back. I was trying to get in on him. You can see Reiksguard here trying to disrupt my Waystalker. Very, very desperate maneuvers right now. But Boris actually routes. So, a second time. My opponent pops Foe Seeker, and then last second, Boris shatters. So he's just trucking it away. That's what he's using Foe Seeker for, to run for dear life. But balance of power is still not ideal. It's kind of mediocre. Now, the mortar fire is coming in on the Treeman, and this is definitely not what you want to be doing. Right now, the mortars are probably doing more harm than good, hurting their own spearmen there. And you can see we're actually going to Death Ball here. So we're going to drop an Earthblood on our boys. We're going to heal them. Ancient Treeman is actually going to tear out those spears. The Waystalkers are actually a respectable melee unit. Both have a bonus versus infantry of... I thought they had a bonus versus infantry. I suppose I was wrong. But they do have a fairly high melee attack of 60. Some decent melee stats. Melee defense of 45 will make them pretty tanky, especially against spears. And so rallied like this around the Treeman to anchor them and provide that some overwatch and terror is definitely going to put them in a good spot. In the meantime, the Dryads are sort of overrunning into the backline, and unfortunately separated a bit from the Treeman as well as the Waystalkers, so they're a bit isolated out there. You can see over here the Eternal Guard fleeing for dear life, trying to run away from those Great Swords, so we do lose one of the units on fairly high HP, 1000 HP still. If we got healed, we could definitely bring them back, but unfortunately that is not to be. Now over here you can see we're going to start picking away at the Reiksguard, and you can see some extreme angling there with the arrows as it smashes into the backs of the Reiksguard, unhorsing a few of those Brave Empire Knights. You can see more chipped down over there. So at this point, I was just trying to get rid of the Reiksguard. I figured mortars are no longer a threat. My infantry is gone. They've been eradicated, basically. There's no bringing them back. So at this point, let's just blob. Let's try to chip down the Reiksguard. If I can remove the Reiksguard, the Waystalker's good melee stats should be enough, alongside the Treeman and Terror, to remove my opponent's infantry from play. And so you can see here, unfortunately, we are wasting a little bit of ammo because I left these guys in free fire for just a little bit so they could fire while moving. And we are chipping down. You can see that one guy completely gets on a horse there. But the Waystalker's doing some work here. You can see those extreme homing shots there. Homing in on a corpse. And they're doing some work. They're chipping these Reiksguard down. These guys down to 39 models. The other unit's down to about 30. You can see another homing shot there. Takes a guy in the back. Some rough stuff. And unfortunately, it does look like one of the Waystalker's shots is always going into the same target as the other Waystalker. So that one of them always ends up missing. But despite that, you know, we're getting some good value. We get another shot in there. These Reiksguard now down to 37 models, and we're able to start terror routing some troops. Obviously, Boris being removed from play means that despite this balance of power being very much in my opponent's favor, probably about 60-40 at this point, we are actually able to get some good terror here because he's getting that monstrous Lord missing penalty of, I do believe it's like 14. So, or 16 actually for the Lord fled. So that's definitely a disadvantage. And my opponent at this point is basically down. His only real units right now are the 2 Reiksguard and the Greatswords. And if they can't pull this through, it's going to be game over. The Mortars might be padding up your balance of power, but the fact is they can't really do much right now. They can't really hurt the Waystalkers. They can't really hurt the Ancient Treeman. They're going to be hurting their own troops more if they do that. You can see here we do get an Earthblood on the Dryads as well as all our boys. The Dryads are going to get in there, get a little bit of a recharge. Flatulence are almost gone, and we're beating down these Greatswords. So Greatswords, while being a very respectable unit, are definitely not going to be great against a big old tree man, but their bonus just doesn't matter. You can see some stray mortar shells going in, but at this point my opponent decides to pull his mortar crews offline and charge into melee. And this, I think, is actually a little bit of a mistake. So mortar crews are very bad in melee. That's just true in general for artillery crews. At this stage of the game, though, these guys still have ammo. These guys still have 7 ammo. These guys still have 2. So if you just run away with these guys, just hide them over there, they're not really, they won't have an impact in this fight really. But if I start routing these guys, if I can beat the snot out of these mortar crews, they're actually going to have a pretty significant impact on the balance of power. I think it is worth mentioning right now, and this is something I learned very recently on the forums. Apparently, balance of power breaks trigger once you've got 2.6 times your opponent's army in value left on the field. And so mortars, you know, they've got value. They're 650 base each of them, so this is like 1300. Even if you count out the missing ammo, which obviously is having an impact here, or probably a pretty significant one. The fact that if these guys rout, it will definitely have a chain effect on the spearmen. It'll have a chain effect on these greatswords and the Reiksguard and all those units, and that could potentially be disastrous. So now the Waystalkers are in here fighting for dear life alongside the Treeman. The Treeman, though, is the focus of most of this aggro. You can see his HP is going to be getting chipped down quite a bit. I actually popped Flesh to Stone there to try to keep him intact, figuring it's going to be helpful against all those Flagellants and the Reiksguard and the cycle charging. And we're definitely whittling those guys down. The Dryads at this point completely destroyed. They shattered. But in this cluster, there's just not much that can be done. The Ancient Treeman and the Waystalker is very tough to hit. The Waystalkers are going to be getting some chip damage in, and if they get knocked over, they got immunity frames, so they don't care too much. That high weight melee attack of 60 when they're buffed up by the Treeman being nearby, it does mean they're going to be putting the hurt down on these troops. You can see balance of power suddenly swing back up in my favor, probably into like 55-45 or 60-40 even, and things are looking a lot more grim for the Empire. That's going to be a little bit of cycle charging here. My Doom Blob basically just sitting tight, doing their very best, and you can see balance of power shaking back and forth as my opponent gets some very brutal cavalry charges in here. He's cycle charges, whittling out my Treeman. In turn, the Treeman tries to slap around the elite units. My priorities right now, I figured the Flagellants, well, whatever. The Flagellants are down to 3 models; they're ignorable. But the Reiksguard and the Reiksguard and the Greatswords are a huge threat. That said, one of my gambles here was the fact that if I can break the cheaper trash, because obviously the cheaper trash for Empire is not, say, expendable. If I can break these spearmen, if I can break these mortars, it's actually going to snowball, chain route these Reiksguard. And you can see actually we're seeing some of the effects there happening right now. The Reiksguard doing its very best, but they are getting terror routed. And there's no doubt that some of that impact is these fleeing mortar crewsmen and the fleeing greatswords and units like that. So at this point, balance of power swing pretty decisively in my favor. About 70-30. The Treeman, though, still at risk. If he gets sniped out by these cycle charges, and these cycle charges do a lot of damage. Reiksguard, especially right now, he's exhausted. So he's only got about 65 or so armor in reality because of the debuff from exhaustion. So the Reiksguard's actually hitting like a truck on the charge, even though they themselves are exhausted. And they're whittling him down. You can see he's dropping a lot of HP. Spears are going to commit here. I think a little bit more patience might have been advisable, but I make a bit of misplay here. I actually separate my Tree Lord, pulling away from the Waystalkers to intercept these Reiksguard, and it's actually going to get him butchered pretty bad here. He drops down to 1400 HP. This second unit of Reiksguard dives in. A few of them get slapped off their horses by that big Treeman, just getting whipped and destroyed. And at this point, it is going to be game, as the forces of the Wood Elves finally do triumph in an incredibly grindy and atrocious game. And definitely very well played to my opponent. Came right down to the wire. Yeah, so breaking things down. Obviously, MVPs in that match were kind of the Tree Man and the Waste Stalkers. They ended up carrying the day against a horde of Reiksguard Greatswords. And a bunch of cheaper infantry. So they definitely performed very, very well. Very up to task. The Waste Stalkers sniping both Boris as well as Light Wizard was huge in the late game, because it meant my opponent had no leadership at all to support his troops. Even if I just sniped Boris, it would have been a big impact. But being able to make sure that my opponent was going to get no encouragement on the field in those late game stages was very, very crucial. As for the rest of the army, well, the Wild Riders kind of failed. They got run down very handily by the Reiksguard. Wild Riders did okay. They definitely shut down my opponent's troops early on. They helped break some spears. They overran the Silver Bullets, which was absolutely critical. As for being effective, they also did isolate Boris and beat him down quite a bit, enabled the Waste Stalkers to get more damage in as well. But in hindsight, they definitely did suffer or struggle a lot. Finally, the Dryads, the Eternal Guard, and the War Dancers, they had an okay time, but the few of them that did get caught out by the Mortars early on, especially these War Dancers, just got destroyed. Mortars are just brutal and will really do a lot of damage. In hindsight, obviously the fact that I didn't run Way Watchers was definitely a bit of an issue here. Had I had Way Watchers, I would have had much better counters, in my opinion, to Reiksguard. I could have easily cut the 2 Hawk Riders, and I would have found myself, I think, in a better position to dispatch, especially the Reiksguard. I could have sort of kept some Eternal Guard in back to protect. I could have kept the Wild Riders. Rearranged my costs a little bit somewhere. Like, you could always cut off the shields on the Wild Riders if you really need to. Or cut the chevrons on the Eternal Guard. And free up a little bit of money, get like 2 Way Watchers on the field. And that would have probably done me more good than the Hawk Riders, for sure. Now, for my opponent's build, now, Flagellants and Greatswords might seem like an oddball pick against the Wood Elves, but they're actually not terrible. The main thing is that both Flagellants and Greatswords will trade very, very well into Wood Elf infantry. Now, they're going to get dumpstered by artillery or by Wood Elf shooting, but I think my opponent really gambled. Franco here gambled on the Mortars, as well as the Reiksguard being able to overrun my backline and Boris being able to disrupt it on his Griffin. So I don't think that was necessarily a bad move. That said, I do think there was a little bit of overcommitment to countering infantry here. Just pure melee infantry, because Flagellants, they cost 600 apiece. So this is, and Greatswords cost 950. So 900. So you're looking at a good 3,300 gold here, going into units that basically only good against infantry. They're not going to do good against Way Watchers. They're not going to do you much credit against Deepwood Scouts. They're not going to make you proud against Wild Riders or Dragons or whatever. They're not great against any of those units. They're very dedicated to beating up on units like Eternal Guard, War Dancers, Azrai Spears, Dryads, kind of, and units like that. And I think it's just a very big investment, especially when you've also invested in Mortars to invest in those units. My opponent basically just had 2 real counters to single model entities, and that was the Silver Bullets and Boris, which I think is very risky and putting a little bit too much of putting all your eggs in one basket. Personally, I think it is better to bring perhaps a Hammer of Witches, bring more heavy cav, because you can ultimately cycle charge a lot of the big targets to death if you just have more cav in the long run. It can definitely be very, very beneficial. It also gives you an advantage if you want to overwhelm your opponent. Another thing I'd consider is dropping Boris from a Griffin onto a horse, just to give you a little more mobility and or a little bit more safety, really. And Mortars, while Mortars are very powerful and they got a lot of value here, I think you might be better off cutting down these one Mortar and upgrading the others with chevrons, because chances are they're going to hit much more consistently. They're going to net you much more value, and it'll actually free up some money, because if we look at the cost there, for the Mortars, they cost 650 a pop, which is cheap, but instead of bringing 3, you could dump one of them and get 2 at like 5 chevrons, which makes your Mortars incredibly accurate and much more efficient against infantry. And that would have been, I think, probably a better choice. After that, probably cut out the maybe not the great swords. Great swords aren't bad, but I would probably cut out at least 2 flagellants, try to open up a little more space, get a nice blazing sun in there, maybe a Zinler's Reiksguard, something along those lines, just to help you out a little bit, especially against single targets. And obviously, Reiksguard isn't meant to counter single targets, but against a Wood Elf single targets, it can be more than adequate. Same with Knights of Blazing Sun, especially if you just cycle charge. And my opponent was doing that very well. He just didn't have enough. He only had 1 unit of Reiksguard, or sorry, 2 units of Reiksguard, so that just wasn't enough to cut the mustard. Plus, it makes it easier to protect your backline. It's much easier to protect a backline if you've got multiple units of Cav, because you can just overrun those Wild Riders, knock out those Wild Riders, all that sort of stuff. So those are just my 2 cents here. Like I said, Franco has his own YouTube channel in German. I'll be sure to leave a link down in the description below. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, be sure to leave them down and I'll respond as soon as I can. Once again, thank you to my opponent for the great game and a lot of fun. And I hope to see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.